We are now, in many ways, emerging from the wilderness time of COVID. It's like we can see some kind of end in sight, finally. And though the desire to sprint out of here and never look back is real, this moment is actually the right time to stop, look back, and consider what has saved us and served us well on this trek through the wilderness of COVID. Which is why for the month of July, as we enjoy our glorious Pacific Northwest summer, each Sunday we pause together, we set down our packs, and we peek inside to see what we carry with us, the things we did, the practices or learning we picked up in the last year that have helped us survive through this time. It's our chance to name that there might actually be good things from this time of COVID that we want to bring with us into the next season. Because, according to the Jesus story, we are not exempt from facing hard times. Other wilderness times will come. So let's keep what we've gathered up in this wilderness, because also, according to the Jesus story, it is in our wilderness times, like a global pandemic and racial reckoning, that God shows up and does some of God's best work. So surely there is something here in us from this wilderness. Let's not leave it behind. So friends, let's dig in together now. What saved you and what served you well during COVID? What will you bring with you? Let's reflect, bring it with us as we live into the new normal together. All right, Salt House. All right, before we settle into our sermon time, just 3 quick things I want to highlight, okay? So first, a reminder that next Sunday will also be an online-only worship service with our hybrid service returning on August 8th, okay? So our next in-person, August 8th, 2 weeks from now. So stay home next Sunday, okay? Second, we have a super fun event planned for Wednesday, August 11th. It's an overnight campout in the backyard of Salt House for our middle schoolers and high schoolers. What? I know, so fun. So the whole family can come for dinner and some games and some activities together, and then the family will leave, but the teens will stay as Pastor Ryan and a whole team of volunteers run a time of games and s'mores and just camp out together, maybe a few ghost stories or two. That's what I would hope for. So in the year to come, we're really intentionally building up our middle school and high school ministries, and we really do need your help. So if you know a teen who might like to connect with community here at Salt House, can you let Pastor Ryan know, and then he can reach out to them, okay? It'd be awesome if they could come to the camp out included, okay? So mark your calendars, though. Camp out on August 11th. And finally, third, a reminder that this is my last Sunday before taking August off with Jason. We're going to take off this afternoon, and we'll have a time of Sabbath for our family that our church council gave us for all the extra everything that we gave during COVID. So we are so grateful to have this time of renewal, and we'll do some traveling and see a lot of family. Pastor Ryan also had this Sabbath time during the month of July, so he's had that as well, which means today, this is our last sermon in this series, asking this question of what has saved us and served us well during COVID, asking what will we bring with us out of this wilderness time. So this month has been our chance to hold these questions, to reflect on this world-altering time in a global pandemic and see it as something that has formed us for forever, right? And asking, how has God been at work in this, in us? Then next Sunday, we've been looking back, and so after this month of looking back, then Pastor Ryan will be here, and he will kick off a new sermon series that helps us use all of that manic, good Pacific Northwest summer energy in ways that help us experiment with practices now in light of what we've learned and what we'll bring with us. So it'll be awesome to have him back, and a great series for August, so don't miss it, okay? Okay, all right. So will you now just take a breath with me, roll those shoulders back, wiggle into your body so that you know that you are here in this moment, okay? Okay. So for this final Sunday in our series, we look to some wilderness experts for what they can teach us, as in folks who spent their lives in and know a thing or two about being in the wilderness, like literally. These are folks who chose to escape the hustle and bustle of city life and to live practically alone in the desert. So totally crazy or an introvert's dream? Could be both, right? I'm talking about the life and ways of the Desert Fathers. They were a group of early Christians. And there were some desert mothers too, although not many and not as well documented as were most things for women at that time. But we can assume that the desert mothers had influence on those desert fathers also. So I want us to jump in and take a look at who they were, these wilderness experts, okay? So jump with me back in time to the 4th century. So Christianity was becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire. Yeah, church and state, yeah, together. So some folks bailed out of the cities and they were headed into the desert to live because they had zero confidence on this whole volatile mix of religion and politics, being pretty sure about which one would rise to the top, right? So they moved to the desert, taking with them very little except their wish to live as close to God as they could. They were following the example of an Egyptian monk named Anthony. Now, Anthony, he had heard something in the church about selling everything he owned and giving the proceeds to the poor, and so that is what he actually did. He dissolved his parents' large estate just 6 months after they had left it to him. Then Anthony headed to the mountains across the Nile from the village where he had lived, where he lived alone in the mountains for the next 20 years. Crazy? Introvert's dream? Both? Yeah. So then in the year 305, Anthony left his house cave and founded a community of people like himself who lived in the wild, in these small cells on bare necessities, just close enough to one another to offer encouragement. One visitor to this earliest form of monastery, they said, man, their places are filled with singing, fasting, praying, and working. They work so that they might give alms, and they live in love and peace with one another. So Anthony's desert experiment became a movement. So Anthony is the most famous of the Desert Fathers and the one who's considered the founder and father of organized Christian monasticism. So 100 years later, after Anthony founded the first community, later similar communities thrived, not only in the deserts of Egypt, but also in Palestine and Persia and Arabia. Some were huge monasteries populated by hundreds of monks, while others were just these loose clusters of solitaries, right? Folks living alone and isolated like Anthony did. So it is these solitaries, they are the ones who became known as the Desert Fathers. They were holy hermits who spent their time making baskets and seeking God, which left them plenty of time to wrestle with their thoughts and ambitions and worries. All that remains now of the Desert Fathers are their sayings, their wisdom that was passed on word of mouth until it was finally written down in various languages. And these writings survive today in classical collections. Have you ever read sayings from the Desert Fathers? Maybe you have. After all these years, they've lost none of their spice. Like the Desert Fathers had sharp tongues and kind hearts. Whether they meant to be funny or not, they often were quite funny. But I bring up the Desert Fathers today because there's something in our experience this last year that resonates with the Desert Fathers. We have been on our own, right? We have been escaping the volatility of politics. Our own hermitage has been happening at home as solitaries, keeping a distance from friends and family, from our church community here, from our teams and clubs and places of connection. Like we've been living in the wilderness too, right? And we've also had holy experiences. It's been a different kind of time, and we have sought God and listened and noticed the priorities that have bubbled up to the surface. So, seeing some of those similarities, there are two things that I want to lift up for us in this resonance with the Desert Fathers, okay? Two things. First, I just want to acknowledge, celebrate even, again, that God meets us in the desert wilderness of our lives. When we're isolated, when it's too quiet, when we're too alone with our thoughts, ambitions, and worries. There is good, hard-won work that we have done through COVID to survive, that God has done in us. And so we take time to see it so we don't miss it and miss the chance to carry it with us, right? So that all being the case, this first thing I want to ask you, what are the practices that helped you seek God and be found by God? For the Desert Fathers, it says there was singing, fasting, praying, and working. For us, it could be showing up for online church or joining one of our many small groups or journaling, meditating, gardening, praying, reading, podcasts, books, counseling, coaching, online classes. Gila and Heather picked up drumming. Pastor Ryan, I know, did some morning yoga with his kids. Are there things that you did or even stopped doing that were things that opened you up to God? And what of this do you want to bring with you to hang on to? Sometimes it's this kind of holy space, even when we're forced to take it away from the hustle, when we're set apart, that can foster the conditions for hearing God. So that's that first thing, we celebrate and we get curious about naming what that looked like for us in ourselves. What do we want to bring with us as connecting us with God? We'd love to see your responses in the comments there if you've got them on Facebook or YouTube. So you can share now or later. That would be awesome. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second, we also name the challenge that we're living in right now and how hard it feels to emerge back into life with actual other people. Let's say more about that. So we see this tension in the Desert Fathers. So I always kind of assumed that the Desert Fathers either really didn't like people or they were simply focused on just doing it all on their own, extreme individualists, which isn't really true. Some of these holy hermits, they did live really far from each other. One lived 32 miles from his nearest brother. Yet even the monks who lived all alone came together from time to time to celebrate communion and to share a common meal afterward, over which they discussed what was happening in their lives, any problems that had arisen in the community. Even if they lived 32 miles apart, they remained in community. They needed one another, and they knew it. This was not simply a matter of physical need, although that was certainly a factor for people living in the wilderness. But there's a deeper level to it as well. Here's what I mean. There's a story about a desert father, an elder who lived all alone, and he undertook a 70-week fast, eating only once a week during that whole time in order to become more receptive to God. So when he was a little more than bone and vapor near the end of that time, he asked God to reveal to him the meaning of a certain Bible passage, but God would not do it. The elder, disappointed by how little his fast had done for him, decided to go ask one of his neighbors what the passage meant. So the moment he closed the door to his cell on his way to see his neighbor, an angel of God appeared to him saying, "Your 70-week fast did not bring you one step closer to God, but now that you have humbled yourself enough to go to your neighbor, God sent me to reveal the meaning of the passage." Then the angel told the elder what it meant and went away. And I like to think that the elder went on to visit his neighbor anyway, right? Breaking his fast with him and swapping stories about what a trickster God is, right? So the deeper reason the Desert Fathers needed one another was to save them from the temptation of believing in their own self-sufficiency. To save them from the temptation of believing in their own self-sufficiency. And man, isn't that something that we need to be saved from too? Our own self-sufficiency, especially now when we have been so solitary and making it all work on our own with the help of Amazon Prime and HelloFresh and Uber Eats and other delivery services. So the second thing for us to name in the bumpiness of re-entry, it is this bumpiness, right? Yes, even as we are emerging on the other side of wilderness, we did it, it also feels really hard still, or in a new way. This isn't the same world. So many things are forever changed because of COVID, and we aren't the same anymore. And so we're navigating how to relate to all these things in the world that aren't what they used to be, while we're not who we used to be either, including in our relationships. Nearly every relationship we have needs to be reestablished, redefined as we go through the bumps of figuring out friendship and expectations after this weird, holy hermitage, as we navigate social awkwardness and depreciated mental health, and as we still navigate the differences in choices about vaccination or not, or masks or not. And if you are feeling these bumps, then take comfort that you are not alone. Relationships are hard right now. Friends, we are emerging out of our own 70-week fast. And actually, it was exactly 70 weeks, 490 days from our last worship service in this room on March 1st, 2020, until July 4th, 2021, when we were back in here a few weeks ago. And so I knew I wanted to share that old story of the Desert Father who fasted 70 weeks. And I was so tickled to discover that we just finished that exact same fast. 70 weeks. I mean, come on. And so we too are wasted down to bone and vapor. And it is time for us to humble ourselves enough to go to our neighbor. Barbara Brown Taylor, whose book, An Altar in the World, I've been referencing through this series, in it, she names these everyday practices that don't seem that spiritual, but really are spiritual things if we enter into them that way, like getting lost and walking the earth, as we've discussed these past weeks. Another one for today is the practice of encountering others. The practice of encounter. And man, this is a season where all of our rough edges are exposed, and so is everyone else's, and we're highly suspicious of humanity, both generally and specifically. And we have missed our people. We're excited, and yet people feel really hard right now. It's both. The wisdom of the Desert Fathers includes the wisdom that the hardest spiritual work in the world is to love the neighbor as the self, right? Oh, thank you, Jesus, for that one. That is such a word of comfort to me that it is hard spiritual work, because I feel that right now. Barbara Brown Taylor explains why this is so hard to encounter others in this way. She says, to encounter others is to encounter another human being, not as someone you can use or that you can change or even fix or help, save, enroll, convince, or control. Man, as I just think about my relationships, like my spouse, my kids, parents, friends, my church, man, that's hard. So to not encounter them as someone you can use, change, fix, help, save, enroll, convince, or control, but to encounter another human simply as someone who can spring you from the prison of yourself if you allow it. Ooh, yes. All you have to do is recognize another you out there, your other self in the world, for whom you may care as instinctively as you care for yourself. To become that person even for a moment. That's what it looks like to encounter others. This can be as frightening as it is liberating, and really it may be the only real spiritual discipline there is. And it is what I know I need so desperately right now, to be sprung from this prison of myself. You? And Jesus knew it would be hard for us too, this seeing love of neighbor as love of self and also love of God, right? That it's all connected. That's why he spoke to it, not only in the Gospel of Matthew, but especially here. So here we're going to hear from Matthew 25. It's in the middle of what Jesus has to say about this kind of metaphorical future moment where he will sort the sheep from the goats, and as it says there in that text. So thank you to Sean for reading this for us.
Matthew chapter 25, verses 34 through 40. Jesus continued, "The ruler will say to those on the right, 'Come, you blessed of my Abba God, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me, naked and you clothed me. I was ill and you comforted me, in prison and you came to visit me. Then these just ask, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or see you thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you as a stranger and invite you in, or clothe you in your nakedness? When did we see you ill or in prison and come to visit you? The ruler will ask them, the truth is, every time you did this for the least of my sisters or brothers, you did it for me.
Man, look out, because Jesus is there in every human, and especially in those we least expect: the hungry, thirsty, the stranger, those without home, without clothes, those who are sick, those in prison. For Jesus, the practice of encountering others is the practice of coming face to face with another human being, especially someone who's different enough to qualify as like capital O other. And at least entertaining the possibility that this is one of the faces of God. It's like love of self and love of neighbor, love of God, like all connected. So in this text from Matthew and in countless other ways, Jesus taught the practice of encounter, and not only by what he said, but by what he did. When we survey the Gospels, we see how Jesus practices what he preaches. And you can note that his teaching is not limited to people who look, act, or think like him. He does the same eye-to-eye thing with Roman centurions, Samaritan lepers, Syrophoenician women, and hostile Judeans. That he does, same with them as he does with his own Galilean disciples. He does it with slaves and rulers and 12-year-old girls and powerful men, people who can be useful to him and people who cannot, with the possible exception of his own family. No one is dismissed from his circle of concern, for no one made in God's image is excluded from the revelation of that same God in themselves. It's so clear in the life of Jesus, right? So for this reason and more, the world's greatest religions have always required communities of people to make them work. We have to be together and try it out together, practice it to see how the rubber hits the road, to see if the rubber even hits the road. The world's greatest religions happen in community. It's why the Desert Fathers, even those miles apart, still gathered in community, and why over the interwebs during a pandemic, we did too, right? We still do. And at the very least, we need someone to tell our stories to, right? Here at Salt House, we celebrate that, how stories matter. It's one of our core practices. But at a deeper level, we need someone to help us forget ourselves a little or a lot. The great wisdom traditions of the world all recognize that the main impediment to living a life of meaning is being self-absorbed. And what a balm to remember this now, right? For me, as I think of how good it is to be reconnecting in my relationships, though bumpy in some ways, I often think I am seeking out other people in order to get something for myself. The deeper truth, when I consider all this, is that I'm hoping that they will draw me out of myself. How about you? Friends, what we're doing here, we let the Jesus story into this very real struggle of now, where we're in rediscovering and redefining our relationships, all of them, as we emerge from the wilderness, and we let it land in us as the spiritual practice of encountering others. We already named that there are practices that have opened us up to God, right? We can bring those with us. And so now we're asking, what is God saying about how we encounter others now? And so I wonder, in what ways do you need to hear this in regards to your emerging out of wilderness and into relationship? Where is this rubbing you? As you consider that for yourself, I'll offer two just general things in the midst of this, okay? So first, I would suggest generous grace. Generous grace. Please extend generous grace to yourself and in your encounters with others. We are all wearing newborn skin right now. We feel tender, and so does everyone else. So give folks generous benefit of the doubt. They're doing their best. And give it to yourself too. People are hard. Mental health is so declined, and we're all in it together, okay? Generous grace. And finally, second, here is a fabulous hack on how to connect with others in the days and weeks to come. And it's simply this: use the questions that we've been asking in the sermon series as a way to connect with others and encounter others. What saved you and served you well during COVID? Keep asking this question of yourself, yes, and use these questions with others. I have been test running it with all kinds of different folks in those moments of like, oh, so haven't seen you for a while. How are you doing? In those moments, the more open-ended and connecting question is the, hey, man, what saved you and served you well during COVID? Like, what did you do that worked? What did you find yourself doing? How did you survive? What did that look like? And that's like all you need. Just arm yourself with that question, this question that we've been living with this month. It has opened up just great conversation and opened me up to encounter folks as someone who can draw me out of myself and into their experience of these past 490 plus days as we all emerge from our fast. Have you tried using these questions already with others? If you have, I'd love to hear about it in the comments or otherwise. But whether or not you have, consider yourself commissioned to encounter others with these questions as a way to be drawn out of yourself and into the presence of Jesus, who is there with you in them. And in this way, even as we close this sermon series on what has served us and saved us during COVID, we are also just getting started, right? May your learning and reflecting and listening continue as you live with these questions and choose to bring with you all that God has formed in you through this wilderness time of COVID. Man, and thanks be to God for all that has been done in us as we become more and more like this Jesus whom we follow, made in God's beloved image and formed in the wilderness to continue to be God's salt and light in our world. So keep on keeping on, my friends. Amen? Amen.